Cathara page 1, right? Yeah. Now, it's interesting. This information, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but what we do need to do is allow the people who are just coming in to see where these pieces fit, or it's going to be very, very difficult to understand advanced Merkaba if you don't know basic standing scalar waves form Partakai grids that are the unified field underneath reality, which matter form is built on. So anyway, I'm not going to read through all of these like I do when I'm teaching Cathara or something like that. What I'm going to do, for the people who are new, I want you to know that there are large bodies of data connected to each of these graphs in various different of the programs that we have. This one happens to be in the Cathara manual. A lot of the ones that you'll see, particularly on anatomy, are in what's called the Cathara Biospiritual Healing System manual. So if you want to know more about it, it is available for you. But I just want you to become familiar with the basic concept and the pictures that go with it. Because just like symbols, I mentioned last night that we use symbols to stimulate the activation of frequency through the optical pineal situation in our heads. It runs frequency into the body that runs into your personal shields to allow more frequency to open. The pictures of the graphs are very much symbol codes. They tell us things on the 3D level that help us understand relationships between different objects or different places or that kind of thing. But they are also encoded or encrypted, which means they're like data packages, where they carry huge amounts of mathematical data in frequency form within them. So you can actually pick up a lot of understanding, even if you can't yet look at a diagram and explain what it means on the 3D level. You're picking up the frequency of the whole direct cognition, and it will help you to understand it. So this is one of the reasons that I wanted to have everybody to have a nice set of nicely ordered, which means frequency sequenced information pertaining to this, no matter how much you've studied the information we have or not. That will help either way. When we start out, we always start with the holographic template. Now, in relation to what we mean by holographic template is literally what is the secret blueprint that you don't see, behind which and under which matter is accreting or matter is manufactured. The holographic template refers to hologram. This reality field that we perceive as solid, three-dimensional matter, is actually a hologram, a holographic projection. Now, we get into, in certain parts, we'll see when we talk about something called the radial body, how literally we are manufacturing our hologram individually and collectively through our breathing, through the in-breath and out-breath, because we are moving frequency literally into and out of manifestation through our body vehicles. Our body vehicles are actually very high-powered conscious machines, and not machines that are just made of metal that you can throw away when you're done with, but conscious living machines that are, if they're fine-tuned, they're like the most beautiful clockwork you've ever seen. And that clockwork right now creates our manifest reality experience. When you really look at what's here, what you're dealing with all around you, every solid thing in the room is a waveform. Even science knows this when they take things down to the subatomic level. They've realized that things are just little things like quarks and groups of electrons and things sticking together that on the outside appear as matter. But on the inside, they're different. Some are particles, some are waves, some behave as waves and particles, depending on the day. There's a lot of strange things already that have been discovered in contemporary science, not even ET science, but contemporary science, that supports the reality of holographic manifestation. It's going to be a while before that becomes the popular thing that your kid's going to learn when they go to school in public school or anything, but it is the basic nature of reality. The holographic template starts with simply what we call units of the consciousness of God Source. Now, primal substance. This is the substance out of which anything is made. What is this stuff? Well, it's obviously energy, but what is energy? What we teach is that energy is consciousness, and consciousness is energy. Consciousness is a substance. It is a substance that takes on the form of waveforms. They can be standing waves or moving waves, but the templates upon which density or matter manifestation occurs are standing waveforms. A standing wave is called a scalar standing wave. It holds a fixed point in a grid with many others, and there are very specific mathematical relationships and geometrical relationships between the positioning of these standing columns of waveforms. Now, standing waves oscillate and vibrate. the way we describe that in these teachings, is oscillation is when they actually flash on, and you would see them, and vibrate is when they flash off. So you have, imagine a sphere covered with light bulbs. They're not moving, but they flash on and off at different rhythms. When they flash on and off at different rhythms, it can appear that they are moving. If you watch lights around a marquee, you can see how they can make it look like the lights are actually running around, but they're not. The lights are just flashing off and on. The templates upon which matter is built are very much like this, but they're not light bulbs. They're literally consciousness in the form of energy that interacts in very specific ways and at very specific angles with other units of like kind and some of opposite kind. There is a whole structure to the way reality is built. It is not haphazard. It is not just a big bang happened and all of a sudden things started to organize themselves. There are big bangs, and the big bangs are a result of certain mechanics that have to do with the template beneath them. There is an order and an intelligence to the way the universe is structured. That order has, for ages, been referred to as the Christ. Not Christ, C-H-R-I-S-T, but Christ, K-R-I-S-T. Because there are two main mathematical programs, template programs, core programs, that everything began, the creation, objectified manifestation began upon. They're called the Christ and the Christalla, and they go together, and between the two of them, they represent 24 points of vibration and oscillation. Now, upon this, which we will get to later when we talk about Cathara grids, upon this structure, standing scalar waves form, and they form intimate, interwoven patterns that create literally the structure of dimensional fiber, of electromagnetic energy, by which things can come into manifestation as individuated forms of consciousness. One of the interesting things about what we teach is that, again, energy is consciousness, which means the energy that makes up the standing scalar waves that make up the templates upon which matter manifests and matter within which consciousness can embody. When you go back to the templates themselves and the standing scalar waves themselves, they are conscious. That means they're beings, not just things. That means they have an awareness. It's an awareness different than what we would possess in a human form here. It would have a different relationship to things like what we call thought or emotion. It would be much more in the category of direct cognition and infinite knowing at all times. The standing scalar wave consciousness that the universe is made out of, that includes your body, that includes your consciousness. You are a part of this consciousness. This is what we mean by we are all units of the consciousness of God. You can't be separate from God's source. God's source was and is and always will be the original consciousness within which everything manifests, because God's source desired to manifest it. God's source set in motion a structure of perpetual motion. The first creation continually occurs. It never ends. It was set in motion upon the Christ and Christalla grids, which allow for, literally, perpetual motion, continually regenerating, the cycling of consciousness into and out of manifestation in perfect balance and perfect synchronization, which allows creation to have beginnings and endings within cycles. But actually, it all occurs at once within the body of the consciousness of God's source. Now, some of these concepts are hard to grasp at first, but as you progress with the work, there's an interesting aspect to the work. It speaks to you on many levels. If it's not reaching you on the D3 level, some other part is picking up a cognition. If you stick with it a while, you'll find yourself opening. You'll find things coming to you. Oh, okay, yeah, I get that. Oh, yeah, I remember what that meant. I didn't think I agreed with that then, but yeah, now I see. So if you work with the information that's provided here, you will find that the parts of universal and personal anatomy that you're going to see today have a life of their own. And you'll also discover you can never be alone in the universe. You can pretend you're alone in the universe. You can choose to set up a belief pattern that you are alone in the universe. Now, if you want privacy, you can be private, but you are never, ever alone. Because your body, literally, is made out of many, many billions of standing scalar waves who are wave people. consciousness. Now, those wave people that make up our bodies are smaller than the consciousness that make up the part of ourselves we would call our cognitive self. So those parts of ourselves, those little waveforms that are beings unto their own right, actually look to us for guidance to help them evolve to higher levels. So there is a responsibility that is implied with recognizing that you are part of the body of God Source. There is a responsibility in recognizing nothing is ever separate from God. Even if it falls down a black hole, it'll go home differently. It'll go home as space dust, but space dust is still sacred. There is no excuse anymore once you realize these things. Once you realize the structure, the science of spirituality, you realize why there is spirituality to spirituality. Because it implies that we are all swimming in a pool of unconditional and absolute love. Love that was given freely as a gift. So freely, in fact, that we were allowed to be destructive if we so choose. We weren't forced to uphold the original creation intention of God's Source, which was a joyful, loving experience of eternal life and infinite creativity. Because if that was forced on us, we wouldn't be able to make choices. We would simply be puppets to a creator God someplace. And that is not the intention of the consciousness that created universal structure. It loved us so much, even though it would prefer that we didn't do things like create black holes and harm each other and harm other things. The freedom is still allowed, though not preferred. So there is a spirituality of recognizing the consciousness. When we talk about these energy structures that you're going to see, they're fascinating on a scientific level. They're fascinating to see the structure, how the structures interrelate with each other, and the more mechanics we get, it gets more fascinating every time we do a workshop. But if we forget, while we're looking at these, that we're talking about consciousness. Consciousness implies a being, structures of being. It's a whole different thing than if you're looking at something saying, oh, I can play with that thing. I can make that do what I want it to. I can learn how to make those currents do something. Oh, really? You might try asking them first if they want to work with you, because there is a responsibility to recognize if you want to reclaim your consciousness and to be whole and to be respected as the being you are, you need to give that as well. In this society, it's such a shame what our children aren't taught. It is such a shame what has become of this civilization, because once upon a time it wasn't like this. Once upon a time, people didn't pick up flower without communicating with the whole bush telepathically and saying, is this all right? Is this a good time for you? Because I won't do it if you don't want me to. And the flowers are usually, oh, just hold on, wait till I pull back my frequency a little bit so it doesn't hurt, right? Yeah. There was an open, conscious relationship with everything. People in those societies did not feel lonesome. You didn't have teenagers committing suicide because they're getting bullied at school. You didn't have people, postmen shooting up McDonald's restaurants because they're frustrated with their job. There was a love in those times and spaces. Now, we've taught ourselves as a species many lessons about love by allowing that state of, you could say, relative perfection to go away. We've taught ourselves why it's worth standing for. It's worth working for. And the one way to do that is to recognize that this Christ template that we're going to be talking about exists, and it has a set of rules and balances. They're not rules that God says you have to do this and you can't do that. They're rules that every unit of consciousness of God that comes into the manifestation framework understands exactly what the Christ is, what the template is, and how it works. It works in a form of action and reaction. There will be consequence to action, and even thought is action. So everything, every being that ever came in this time matrix, I don't care how much it might whine now about nobody's being fair to me, everyone knew when they first came into manifestation what the rules of the game were. And the rules were, there's a certain way that the energy systems here work. There's a certain leeway to where they can be pushed into using them in ways they were not meant to. But if you push too hard, the literal laws of interdimensional physics will push back, and you will get consequences that you won't be happy with. Everyone knew that when we came in. Many people have forgot it, not just here. What it means is the universe and the cosmos are self-regulating. They don't require God to play warden. God just is and extends love and continually sends pulses of consciousness in for manifestation and receives other pulses back home for, recirculation, to go back home with Source if you want to. That is an option. But God Source does not play warden. The stuff that we've been taught about God is really a shame. Vengeful, wrathful gods, God's going to punish you, fire and brimstone and all this. These are false creator God people. All right, the stories that are written about gods that do things like that, they were put into the stories about real God. They were not put in with God's permission, but again, it was allowed. Now, that means some of our sacred books, some of our holy books, they started out holy, and now they're holy, but it's spelled different. They've got lots of holes in them where they took out the good stuff. And they have lots of other things in them that weren't originally there. This applies right now to every religion that's on the planet. There were 12 sacred religions once for the 12 tribes of human races who were the original guardians of this planet. Each race had custody, let's say, over guardianship over a particular set of teachings. And there were 12 primary sets of teachings that dealt with everything from universal order to history, past, present, and future, to sciences, to every aspect of spirituality and living. These teachings were part of that original set of doctrines that were recorded on something called CDD plates, cloister door tour plates. These are holographic recorder discs. They're very small discs for the new people that might not have heard of them before. They do exist in physical form, and they have the ability to record multi-timelines of historical record, almost like having an electromagnetic video cam with lots of different lenses that could point in all directions and literally record and store for infinite amounts of time. Now, the information that used to be the religions of this planet, the true religions, the ones that were spiritual and not just dogmatic, those teachings were progressively lost here, progressively compromised here. Little bits show up in the Bible, little bits show up in the Quran, little bits show up in the Buddhist teachings and the Hindu teachings and the Baha'i teachings, little bits here and there and everywhere. But everybody's bits are fighting with each other because of the other things that were put in. The other things that weren't there to begin with, that talk about wrathful gods that are going to fight or punish, these weren't the original teachings because that is not true to the nature of God. But it is true to the nature of some beings from other places that are, well, once upon a time were more evolved than we are right now. And they decided that they would push the laws of nature to the point where they created a consequence for themselves that they could no longer go home through the route of ascension. And they were angry, and they became jealous. And they decided that they would recreate the creation in their own right, and they would put themselves in the image of God, and they would become the new creators, since they had forsaken their own chance of being able to have the eternal life system that was the original gift that was given to everyone. Now, this place has been hugely influenced by beings of that sort. We'll talk a little bit about them tomorrow. We've talked enough about them. I'm so tired of talking about these guys that it's like enough already. There's tons and tons of information in things we've published already about all sorts of races and their dramas and what they did here and how we got involved with them and they got involved with us. It's all there. But what it all comes back to is the spirituality of science and the science of spirituality. There are three primary units that every other particle or waveform is built upon. They're called partikai, particay, and particum. Now, they are simply words. They're actually frequency resonance patterns that are close to the resonance pattern of these particular units. That's what is a name? It is a sound, right? It's a sonic signature that has to do with the vibration or oscillation of the thing you're calling a name. So the names you'll see of a lot of these things are as close as you can get translated into our languages here of the actual tonal frequency of the particular thing that's being named. So we have three primary units of consciousness and units of energy, called partikai, particay, and particum. There's a whole bunch of teachings that go with this that gets into something called partikai phasing. Partikai phasing, in simple terms, is how these three units interact with each other. And it starts out as one unit, let me use my thing here, where you have this is a tall screen. Okay. You have the partikai, the particay, and the particum. Basically, they become antimatter, which is actually gaseous light. If you want to look at it that way, it would be considered density 5 gaseous light. You have antimatter, which is the opposite of matter. All right? These are the base units of conscious energy that group together in many different ways to form particles, antiparticles. Particles live in our particle universe, which is called the particum universe. This is where you'll get these words. You'll see these words all over the place. You'll see the abbreviation PCM or PKA, means particum universe or particule universe. Particule universe is our parallel universe that's built upon a primary base of particule antimatter units, where our system is the particum universe. You could look at particum as the female and particule as the male, and the particule, the original spirit or androgynous being out of which they both came. Now, particule, and particum are standing waves, little tiny standing waves that cycle. They go back and forth from being an antimatter state of unification, then flashing on into manifestation of particle and antiparticle. This would be their oscillation stage when they're on here, and you would be able to see them if you were looking at them with your etheric microscope vision. When they go into vibration, they would flash off and become antimatter particles. That's a simple way to understand it. Now, what these do, these units of consciousness do, they always come in the three, in a group of three, or one that becomes two and then goes back to one again. So they cycle. That's called particle phasing. They flash on and off, but they're not just individual. They group together, and they form first strings of these units, and those strings then form grids, like crosshatched grids of these units, like a fabric being woven, a fabric of light and sound, a vibration and oscillation of energy units, and those grids end up with 3 different rhythms of flashing off and on that form a 3-dimensional base structure that creates chelons. Chelons are basically 3-dimensional forms of light and sound waves. They're 3-dimensional because you have 3 different lines of particule, and particum flashing on and off at 3 different rhythms. So it creates a 3-dimensional format. This is the basis. We call this the crystal body, the chelon crystal body. Everything in manifestation, including the entire universal framework itself, has a crystal body structure. Later, we come to call these the shields. So when we talk about the standing scalar wave shields, we are talking about a part of the crystal body structure. But in truth, everything, every part of our matter has a crystal structure to it. It has this structure of particle, and particum as the core template. Now, if we understand that this is the basic primal substance, and all sorts of other things come out of this, as we'll see when we progress through into primal life force currents, we'll find out where electrons and protons and neutrons and a whole bunch of other trons that go all the way up a 15-dimensional scale fit in, because we've actually been given that much information on this, where we have 15 dimensions in one 15-dimensional time matrix. Each dimension represents one flash line of particle, and particum that have a specific flash line rhythm. Right? So dimension 1, for example, would have a slower flash line. They flash out and off slower. Dimension 2 would be faster. You get up to dimension 15, and it's really fast. Now, these standing waves that form standing wave grids, they form movement on the outside, or actually it's on the inside of matter. When we get into waves that move here, the electromagnetic spectrum, that we have our light and sound waves and gamma waves on one end and infrared on the other, and all the other stuff science doesn't know is there yet, it is because of the interaction of these standing waves and how they are behaving, how they are cycling, how fast they are flashing on and off in relation to each other and at what angles, that other waveforms come into perceivable manifestation. It's part of the holographic process where we're actually all made of these right now, and everything in the room is made of them. The air is made of them. Every molecule that exists, every atom, every electron is made of them. But we don't see that because our consciousness has anchored itself into a very specifically organized pattern or shield of particle units, of standing waves, that bends the energy of our consciousness into very specific relationships. So we are able to see different types of reality fields. Now, right now, for many thousands of years, our races have been stuck on one channel, let's say. We've been able to look out at our world here, and we can see what's now. We have a bit of memory of what was before, but not a lot, and a little bit of ability to project about what might be. That's a very, very limited spectrum, actually. It's like having one channel on a TV satellite dish. It's like, where's all the rest of the 100 and some channels that normally you would get? We can get more channels of perception, but right now we have to free our body mechanism up, not just our minds. It's one thing to be told that you can't do something and accept that belief. When you accept an idea, you have accepted an energy pattern. You have manifested that pattern inside your energy structure, and it will faithfully reflect outward some version of what you just accepted. When we think about what science tells us, that we have a subconscious mind, that part of ourselves that moves us around and it's down in there someplace, all those childhood memories and all those traumas and things and God knows what else, like reincarnational memory might be in there. If we think about what is generating energy patterns inside of us, and we realize we have this part of ourself that we're literally cut off from, that even contemporary science will tell you is there, you realize how much you don't have control over what kind of reality you're going to manifest right now, over your perceptual filters. Because every thought you think, whether you think it consciously or you think it with a piece of yourself that got stuck in childhood and is still floating down around your D2 level somewhere around here, jerking your emotional strings now and then, that you are still creating, whether you're doing it consciously or subconsciously. Part of what the process of awakening is learning to create consciously and to realize that every time you speak a word, every time you take an action, every time you think a thought, which is an inner action, you have created something. It can be scary. I mean, what if we all got transported right now to a place where as soon as you thought it, it popped into reality? Wouldn't that be scary? I would want like they must have halfway houses or something, where you get a little delayed reaction so you don't do horrible things by accident, I mean, imagine all the thoughts. How many thoughts go through your head in a period of 20 minutes? Even if you're listening to somebody talk, you have like part of yourselves worried about dinner over here, part of yourself someplace else thinking about a vacation you might have had, part of yourself thinking about what you're going to do in the office tomorrow morning. There's parts of you all over the place. If you were in a place where direct manifestation, instantaneous direct manifestation, you'd find yourself in 10 different bodies, kind of going, oh, I wasn't focusing, was I? Right? One of the first things, if we are going to become multidimensional, is learning how to focus our mind with intention and clarity, and learning how to calm down the chatter. That everybody's got chatter. There's lots of chatter. There's lots of parts of ourselves talking to each other, and if they're not talking to each other, there's things being beamed through the airwaves these days. There's all sorts of channeling broadcast stations. We have like the Archangel Michael channel. We have the Thoth channel. We have probably a good 600 or 700 of them out there, and literally you can look at them as transmitting stations. People like to, in the New Age movement, like to look at these things as lovely beings that are coming to spend time with them. Yes. Well, think about virtual people on the internet. You know how you can design yourself a person? And you can say, this is me, right? And you can interact with other people. And you have people in shapes that aren't them, with names that aren't them, doing scenarios that they never do in their real life, interacting in these hologram bodies on the internet. They have that already. Well, this is what's going on with most of the channeling movement right now. There's not even real people on the other end of it. There's electronic broadcasts. And that's what's sad, because a lot of people, they got visuals, they even have some sensory ability. There's all sorts of interesting things going on that are technological rather than spiritual, but they're being passed off as spiritual. When we get into understanding what spiritual is, you don't get, I like the word as is a lot, hoodwinked. You don't get hoodwinked, you don't get fooled as easily by those kind of things. Because when you start to learn, okay, if I'm made out of scalar waves, that means, gosh, I must be susceptible to other waveforms. And you think of all the waveforms that are all over the place. There's electromagnetic waves floating around everywhere. The units that form grids, that form three-dimensional grids, which form crystalline structures of light and sound. Now, these are, of course, living structures, because the units themselves were units of the consciousness of God. They were, and they always will be. And that means we are too. It means you can't escape the original source of creation, because we are living embodiments of it, and not just our minds being an embodiment of it, or our spirit being in the image of God, but everything is in the image of God as an energy form, a conscious energy form that can take on any form or no form. If you want, when we get past understanding that we're made out of light and sound waves, part of Kai, part of K, and part of Come, we get into things of, okay, what type of structures. What is the structure that this primal substance forms? And that's where we start to understand the, let's say, body of the cosmos.